Hello, Internet. Once again in 2024. This is the first time we're going to air some episodes. Uh, as usual, I'm Haffisz, and today I'm with,
Is with Adi.
as usual. And I think it's not too late to say or wish our listeners a Happy New Year, not uh, the Christian calendar, but also the Chinese New Year, which is constantly going to happen this weekend. So, a long, long way ahead. I mean, also, the last time we had an episode was 2, 3 months ago.
Yeah, it's been quite a while due to a lot of commitments on our end. We haven't been able to put out an episode, but yeah, here we are.
But I think the our revival today, our revitalization today, I think was inspired from some event, I believe, Adi. So,
Yeah,
what was that?
yeah. Over the weekend, about let's see, on the 3rd and 4th of February, me and Haffiz were at KLPodfest. We bore witness to a lot of great events, a lot of great workshops, a lot of great podcasts, and a lot of great people who are also getting into the scene of podcasting, have already established their own podcast. So, looking at all these people, looking at all these groups do their own thing and honing their craft, practicing their trade in that way, kind of gave us a huge shot in the arm for us at Koptiam Council. We definitely came back with a fresh insight, and we want to try do more in a way. And we've learned a great lesson is to stay really consistent on these things. Is just keep pumping them out, and that's what we hope to do for this year. Kopitiam Council will try provide more episodes, more engagements, and more content for you all to listen to as we try to cover current issues, current affairs, both local and international.
There were so many podcasters during the 2 day event on the last weekend, and among all of them, I think I'm going to shout out and say a huge inspiration drawn from Kinabalu Podcast. I think these are three guys that full-time teachers in Kota Marudu, out of all places, and then doing podcasts on the side and already reaching 100 episodes on their podcast for the last 3 years, with some members in and out for a lengthy period of time. So I think that's the kind of commitment we get from other podcasters that came. Of course, there were bigger names like Okay Let's Go and KJ, but I think uh, which group that we can relate most, I think if I had to say one particular podcasters, it has to be Kinabalu Podcast. How about you? Which
Yeah,
anything that
yeah,
caught your
yeah.
eye? Yeah.
Obviously, because we got a picture of them. So, I mean, they're the only ones we actually, had a chance to sit down and talk to, and it was great fun. It was great meeting guys like that. They were very friendly and very cool, and learning about what they've done, what they've created out of this Kinabalu podcast. It gives us like that sort of inspiration because they're able to be so relaxed, so chill, and just like talking to each other, having that kind of chemistry and that kind of bond that can facilitate. You could be talking about anything, but it's that chemistry that kind of facilitates a huge productive discussion. Going back after meeting them, listening to a few of their episodes, I can see why they would call themselves Sabah's number one podcast. So it was great to meet them, and who knows, maybe we can try have them on here on Kopiam Council one day, hopefully. But of course, there were
Yeah.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. This is definitely in the pipeline. I think we already talked to them. We talked with Ricardo, Kenny, and Faisal how they were keen on having us also. So I think this is a collaboration that needs to be done, but also more importantly that we need to hold our end of the bargain here, because we need to be more consistent, because not just for particular podcasts, but also for listeners out there who wants to find a different perspective from any other podcasters or any other news outlet out there that delivering the news. We believe, Competent Council, Haffiz and Adi, I think we believe that we can offer some perspective out of the ordinary to enlighten any issues that we talk on Competent Council.
Yeah, so that was great. One of the many highlights that we had throughout KL Podcast, and we hope to be able to see more of these kinds of events happening. Seeing all the wonderful podcasts that are in the works right now. Like we went to the whole pitching competition and we heard a lot of great podcasts that range from very homegrown passion projects all the way to full scale productions. So a variety of content to consume there. Of course, it's mostly KL centric, but who knows? Maybe Sabah has the potential to actually cultivate its own scene in podcasting. But aside from that, a lot of great content all around. But of course, as you mentioned, one of the big highlights was a special episode of Keluar Sekejap from KJ and Sharil. So that was a huge thing. I remember we were sitting up at the top, and then we were just like commenting over everything they said, like giving either yeah, I agree with what they said, also saying that stuff like, oh well, what about this? What about that? They haven't considered this or that. And of course, it's their opinion, but there was a huge how do you say restlessness in us, trying to say like, oh, they haven't touched on this, or maybe we disagreed with their opinions. So maybe we could try highlight some of the listeners here. What do we think of that special episode?
I think a huge respect to people seated surrounding us for not us making our head with something, because I think we were quite we were among the loudest in our group. But hey, we got some of the things that we got picture correct answer. So I think we deserve that the rights to shout. I think I like the concept what Keluar Sekejap did, display of the show, because this is more of like interactive, right? So they ask questions about the picture, what you think of it, and then deliver a story, not literally about the picture, but what happens in relation with the picture. So I think let's go through the first one. I think Tunku Abdul Rahman, and then how they Tunku Abdul Rahman is a personnel that very big in obviously in Peninsular Malaysia, but I'm not so sure it's the same thing in Sabah and Sarawak, at least at the time, at least during his premiership. So I think while we agree of the the nation narrative that it's he's the first prime minister of Malaysia and whatnot, but we need to understand also from the perspective of Sabahan and Sarawakian that we have our own respective leaders that we look up to. For Sarawak Temung juga, which is later on that we're gonna mention, because Keluar Sekejap also mentioned this. So I think there's some sort of imbalance in terms of how we portray these leaders. So one is a national leader, so the other is not. That's why we got the idea of Sabah and Sarawak join Malaysia instead of Sabah, Sarawak, and Peninsula and Singapore form Malaysia. So that's where it derived from. The sort of like we classify them into a different tier, and of course we look at other leaders as well along those lines. It's the same thing. Like we were barely mentioned about any other politicians, like Tun Mustafa in Sabah as well, and other Dato' Haris Saleh, maybe certain as recent as the 1980s. So yes, for the first one, I would pick on the picture of Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra Al Haj. How about you? Which one that interests you?
First, the one about Tunku is also quite interesting, because we also don't really know on the circumstances of his role that he played when it comes to the formation of the federation, because Tunku actually wanted to bring Sabah Sarawak into the fold, mostly because of securing electoral security. Basically, he saw that Sabah Sarawak was a potential voter bank in trying to balance out the population of Singapore, because he felt that certain concessions will be made to accommodate for a new demographic which may not align with the current the status quo during his premiership. So trying to bring over Sabah Sarawak would help in this kind of respect and balancing it out. And in a way, it's kind of paid a lot of dividends for a lot of parties in Malaya, because we always get this whole narrative that Sabah and Sarawak are kingmakers. So maybe it's sort of come full circle. Tunku's vision in a way was in a way ahead of its time in terms of foreseeing how is it that you're able to maintain the status quo and ensuring the longevity of the of Barisan Nasional at least for the last 60 years, so to speak. But okay, and another point is that of course it's around the same slide, I think, is when they were asking who's Tun Mustafa, Tun juga the Sabah and Sarawak leaders. Sharil made quite a remark about how do you say the potential of autonomy and decentralization for Sabah and Sarawak. KJ was quite on board with the idea that Sabah and Sarawak deserves to have that kind of empowerment. But Sharil, he was a bit cautious. He said that, okay, well, they asked for this and asked for that, then what else will they ask? Potentially, they could be asking something that, of course, if we say now, certain agencies might not be too happy to hear. But I think that is a bit of a, how do you say, a false alarm or a bit of an alarmist kind of narrative to be painting. One is because movements such as SSKN, Sabah Sarawak Malaysia, is considered quite a fringe group. Even like Sarawak nationalists, or Sabahan nationalists, don't really see the potential in trying to leave the federation. Not to mention that constitutionally it is prohibited to leave. That is one of the guarantees that we had during the signing of the Malaysian Agreement in 1963. So that was a bit of a. I was wondering. That's kind of a redundant statement to say. Rather, I think the immediate concern would be that if Sabah and Sarawak is not able to get these concessions in order to catch up to the developments in Peninsular Malaysia, then it's civil unrest that could happen. It's not a fact of give more. Give an inch, they take a mile kind of situation. It's more that if you're keeping down the peripheries, which you come to rely on for natural resources and basically propping up the Malaysian economy, that's just going to lead more it's counterproductive in a way. But of course, being from Sabah, is that decentralization and devolution can always happen because we had the Malaysian agreement. If we want to go for, if there's some kind of parameter or framework of going for devolution, decentralization, you just look back to the Malaysian agreement and you look back to the constitution, because those are binding rules and binding agreements that we agreed to once we form the federation. And that is the best parameter to see how far that Sabah and Sarawak can ask for certain concessions on devolution and decentralization or autonomy in general. So I don't see that there was a argument to be made, and I felt that it was more like just playing devil's advocate, just to be a bit more engaging. But of course, being me and Haffiz being Sabahan, we can't help but feel that that's a bit of a kind of just poking at the Sabahan and Sarawakian sentiment. But that's for me what I enjoyed. Is that stimulating feeling that there's a lot more to be had in this kind of conversation. But of course, Sabah and Sarawak was only mentioned once, and like usual, relegated in favor for more, how do you say, wider national narratives.
Adi, I want to remind our listeners here that you've done some extended research on MS63, and I want to play two different advocates here, like some arguments. How would you respond to, because some argument says that MS63 is basically null because during the signing, whatever, like the politician, those who sign those, especially from Sabah and Sarawak, were not elected representative. They were just chosen by the colonial and also from the Peninsula Malaysia. This is, my friends who actually signed the papers, and hey, now you have to listen to this paper. So how would you respond to that?
I think when you can't make it so clear cut, because you see the leaders that did sign the agreement were recognized as community leaders, tribal leaders, people of authority that are able to make that decision. And when it comes to the state building processes, it went under that kind of assumption. The people of Sabah and Sarawak went under the assumption that these leaders are the representatives. So they went along with the Kobo Commission, they went along with the IGC under that kind of assumption. So that would give kind of a not the most ideal, but kind of a basic barometer of what Sabahans and Sarawakians think of the merger itself. But adding on more to that is that there was somewhat of a indirect election leading up to the signing of MA63. However, I think this was done mostly on the district level. So there was some form of the democratic processes happening leading up to MA63. So you cannot take it as like how do you say a very standard definition of elected representatives, because the democratic experiment was very new to Malaya. It was very new to Sabah, Sarawak, and Malaysia as a whole. So we cannot try apply that kind of standard of, okay, this is qualified or not. We have to just look at the implications or the underlining context or narratives that was happening at the time. Then that could give a better case of legitimacy to that statement. Yeah, I mean, people like to look at the black and white, but it's definitely not a black and white situation.
So, what are the images that bring something, a lot of argument into when we were in the hall during that night? I think some of the pictures after Tun Abdul Rahman, there was a Ganyang Malaysia, where the treaty between Malaysia and Indonesia. I think this is the pursuant, because before during the formation of Malaysia, the Ganyang Malaysia was very strong indeed, because Indonesia ganging up with Philippines and others, so that Malaysia will not be to a fruition. So I think, what do you think about this, and how fair was KJ and Sharil describing the moment?
This was about confrontasi, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they talked about basically the basic background of confrontasi, but I mean, there was a lot of things happening behind the scenes of what motivated Indonesia, what motivates Philippines, and that's because Sabah and Sarawak was decolonizing. The British was leaving in hands of regional, whatever regional powers was able to assert itself, and of course, the more land that you possess, the more resource, the more comes to the idea that, okay, more resources is going to come over to you. Sabah and Sarawak being one of the richer regions that possess such resources, of course, it's going to be a huge boon to any kind of rising or fledgling state, basically. But in a way, there was a lot of intrigue happening behind the scenes. Is that Indonesia and Philippines, they did propose a confederation with Malaya, Sabah, Sarawak, Singapore to create Mapilindo, which was a concept to actually create a nation, somewhat akin, I guess, in a way to the European Union, but to have one state identity. But it's funny because they did promote that under the whole banner of the unification of a Malay race. So it was very grand design, basically. And of course, it didn't go through because of just how culturally diverse and ethnically diverse the region is. It's definitely going to, have a lot of challenges in terms of representation. So it never really got that much serious thought. However, there was also some kind of moves by the British, the Australians, to decide whether or not Sabah, North Borneo itself should go to Indonesia or go to the Philippines. So they had their own interests as well. So in a way, it's a mix of why Indonesia would move to do such a thing was it's a mix of material interests, but also the feeling of this. It seems like a natural, a natural materialization, basically, of the national identity of the respective countries. I mean, it's a very abstract idea, but it's almost like a nationalist kind of motivation, basically. There's always the underlying stories because things don't happen out of the vacuum. But I hope this just gives some kind of clarity into like why things would happen in such a way. I mean, even now we're wrestling with the whole Sulu claim, and the Philippines has been very awkward about it. So in a way, we can trace that back to at least 500 years ago during the Sultanate of Brunei, then transition over to the Sultanate of Sulu, over to the British company, and the North Borneo Charter Company, then the Crown Colony here. So, I mean, if we look back, there is a lot of underlining events that led up to this kind of moment.
Yeah, I think this is just one of the example of how whichever British colonial landed, or how to say, redraw certain boundary for certain countries, create such have a legacy problem. This is so true in Palestine. This is so true in Hong Kong, and this is so true in Kashmir, and this is also true in Sabah. Not so much in Sarawak at the time, but in North Borneo, where predominantly North Borneo belonged to the British, and then it was up to them to do whatever they like at the time. So they want to decide it, and then they go with the Malaya because it's simply under one umbrella, not the under United States of America to Philippines, and also not to under the Anglo-Dutch in Indonesia. So yeah, I mean, this is also a pattern that we see. But moving on from that picture, Adi, what's next that would you like to bring up?
I think the whole normalization of ties between Malaysia and China was quite interesting. Mostly because when it was Nixon that went to China, it was a huge stir there. It was a huge event in terms of world history. However, Malaysia was considered ahead of its time doing so, especially from another Asian country. So it was very interesting to see like how they discussed it, saying that it was a diplomatic victory for Malaysia. And I think there is some credit to be there. That kind of praise is it has a lot of merit, because I believe that in terms of the foreign service, Malaysia has been able to practice neutrality consistently, not being able to play to the regional or the world powers of China and the USA. Of course, we've seen some administrations tilt slightly to one particular part of the axis, but we've always maintained that neutrality, that we only work depending on how it can benefit the region and how it can benefit Malaysia, owing a lot to our strategic position in the South China Sea, the Straits of Malacca, and access to the Indian Ocean. So that needs a lot of balancing, that needs a lot of engagement, and it needs a lot of confidence building between every major stakeholder involved. And I think when the way Sharil and KJ was touting the foreign service, I think very much warranted. Actually, one of the key components in ensuring the whole South China Sea dispute has been cooled down during the later half of 2010s was because Malaysia had quite a decent enough foreign service and competent people to actually try bring China to talking about the code of conduct in the Manila summit, and which is something that I don't think has been really revived. There hasn't really been much movement to actually normalize all code of conduct, but it was actually a lot of effort did come from Malaysia to actually pacify and lower tensions in South China Sea. So a big role to play. I mean, of course, Malaysia, we feel that we get on the news for many of the wrong reasons, but I think we've made quite a huge footprint on the international community, and I think that is something we can take a lot of pride on.
Yeah, I think the underlying facts also that I want to mention here is that how during the normalization ties is that I think at the time Malaya, specifically Datuk Tun Abdul Razak, saw this as China as a potential market, because Malaysia, since its inception, is a trading nation. We realized, our forefather realized, that we cannot survive on our own in terms of economically economically spending inwards. So we need always to reach out outwards, and China at that time was not China today. China in the 70s merely has a different reputation, and at the time Cultural Revolution was happening, and if I may say, it was another birth of China into a modern 21st century. So when it happened, China sees Malaysia as as a, a huge or important recognition from the international community that welcoming China and ushering them to the 2000s that they eventually become China today. Yes, I agree with you that we Malaysia made a huge footprint in the international communities, and by this having these ties is also even though it was I think economically benefiting both nation, but it was also serving some benefits to the diaspora Chinese in mostly larger part in Peninsular Malaysia. So I think it's a lot of win-win on both sides, and credit to our forefathers for saw the opportunity and they took it by the horn at that time. Yeah. Moving on next one. So we should have some anything that you want to talk more about KJ sessions the other day?
I think that's most of the highlights that I did get from there. Of course, I don't want to make it all about us being wow, we're in the Keluar Sekejap. We're witnessing a Keluar Sekejap episode happening. But I mean, it's nice to see that a lot of people were quite engaged with the content. Of course, KJ and Sharil are very good interlocutors, so whatever they say always has that kind of tact and that level of sophistication, but still very easy to digest. No, I think one thing I do want to mention was that poll they made on accepting a PAS prime minister. I remember it was about would you accept a prime minister from PAS? And what was surprising was 40% said yes, and this was in Petaling Jaya, which is quite a stronghold for anti-PAS, people who are anti-PAS. So I was like, wow, that is a huge number actually. 40% of the
Mhm.
crowd of like I don't know, maybe about 300 people inside the hall saying 40% they would accept. I don't know how much of it is serious or just messing around just to make it
Yeah.
funny, but still, it kind of the temperature of the room got a bit hot, so to speak, because this is something that they bash. People I know in especially in KL would bash as much as they can. So it was a very interesting moment actually to see that.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that I mean I've always been critical for and what do you call this for Keluar Sekejap, but I was so grateful for the event that they had the other day. It was the first podcast in Malaysia. I'm not so sure if it's something similar going on in Indonesia or other parts. Like I always mention how podcasters in Indonesia are on different levels. So I'm looking forward for next year's edition, if there's any. And I'm also looking forward if we could set our foot on a different podcast festival, namely in Indonesia or maybe in Bangkok. So that's
Yeah,
something that I look out for in the future.
yeah,
All right.
definitely. That was our short little trip to KL Podfest. Fantastic event. Hopefully, we can see more, and hopefully, who knows? Maybe Kopitiam Council can sort of make sort of its mark within this 1 year. Who knows, right? Things can happen. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. It was very very tiring for both me and Hafiz, of course, because there's just so many things to do. So who knows if there's next year, maybe we'll go still, and maybe some of the listeners will feel inspired to make their own podcast. It shows that there is a growing scene for podcasters, and in a way, we're kind of in the wild west in Malaysia in terms of establishing what is the meta narrative. So the whole environment of podcasting. So good to see how things will evolve over the next year or even the next 5 years.
Next up, we're going to talk about presidential election in Indonesia. All right, Adi. Now that we are done with our KL podcast episode, let's move on to something that's gonna happen within less than a week, I guess. About a week from now, which is
Less than a
presidential
month.
election. Yeah, on 14. Yeah, on 14 of which is on Valentine's Day. So if you're in Jakarta, whoever, plan your traffic carefully because you don't want to be late to your polling station and also your date. So that's advice from us from Competent Council. Uh, PEMILU 2024. This is one of the highlights of this year's election. But of course, we're gonna later on going to talk about an election that just happened earlier today. But that's later. So we're going to talk about Indonesia first. So Adi, what do we have?
Okay, so as of recording this episode, it's only a few days away till Indonesia decides on the government that will be formed after, how you say, 2 terms from incumbent President Joko Widodo, who in a way has had a stellar or kind of a star-studded career as Indonesia's premier, making all kinds of huge reforms, many investments, and even taking on the constitution itself to shape itself Indonesia that is very much ruled and dominated by his ambitious ideas. So we're having all kinds of candidates coming up to the ballot boxes, all in a way kind of pursuing, or you can say indirectly, having some kind of continue the legacy of Jokowi himself, or some even being anti-establishment, going against everything that this incumbent has actually set out to establish throughout his entire tenure. So many candidates, very interesting candidates, also a great amount of implications for the region itself. So in a way, Philippines has already had its general elections. Malaysia has already had its general elections. Philippines has just Thailand has just had its general elections, and in a chaotic way found its new leader. Now it's up to Indonesia. Indonesia is now in the spotlight in Southeast Asia when it comes to taking up positions of leadership in the region. So Hafiz, um, who do you think? Do you have any horses that you feel would win the race?
I will answer that later on, but I would like to highlight some of the key facts about this year presidential election. So the first one, Eddie, this is the first time a three-horse race for at least since 2009. So it's been a long time since it happened, and also this is one of the grandest election, not just because of three-horse races, but also people who are actually running for it. So that's I'm going to go through a little bit about each and every uh, president election and vice president election. So the first team that I would like to talk about is Prabowo. Prabowo is a ex-general, military general during sort of time. So he has, well, it depends on whoever you ask. He has a dark past about Indonesia or whatever that you may say. But I would like to emphasize on how Prabowo changed his, after losing two straight election to Jokowi, changed his narrative, changed how his appeals to the masses. Because we need to realize that the 48% of the electoral votes are actually considered millennial. So in this election, Prabowo actually sort of display himself as a very chubby, this is his word, chubby grandfather kind of figure, so that something more appeal towards those who in Asia we have the filial piety concept. So he's playing down on that, and then he's paired with Jokowi's eldest son, 36-year-old Gibran, that gonna uh, push forward whatever that Jokowi has planned or leave as his legacy. Now, this is interesting because even though Jokowi's son is with Prabowo, but Jokowi is also belong to PDIP party, okay, the People's Struggle Party of Indonesia. But the main candidate for this party and got endorsement from the president of Megawati is second president election, which is Ganjar Pranowo. So Ganjar is used to be a Central Java governor, so he knows very well about Jakarta, and these are where most of the electorals are gonna be at. So the key here is to win Jakarta, or especially the Javanese island, because it's construct about 48% of all votes in whole Indonesia. So if you safely can say, if you win Java Island, you win the vote. The next one, Adi, is not less of a degree, because he was also a ex Jakarta governor. So Anies Baswedan also served as an education minister during Jokowi's first term in office, but get reshuffled after 2 years and then ousted to. And then when he went out, he go on to go against Jokowi and his legacy. So you can see like a full circle here. Like everyone has it at everyone's throat, ready to slit and sharpening their knife at any time. And we can see that it's gonna be um, a exciting fight on 14th of February 2024, because not this election offers a lot at stake, and this election is a third for Prabowo, but first for the both candidates, and each of them we're going to talk about it later. But this is the background of all three candidates that we at least need to know of, and safely to say, too long didn't read. If Prabowo and Ganjar, if these two are going to win, legacy of Jokowi is safe. But if Anies win the election, he already explicitly said that he will do some major changes to Jokowi's legacy. What do we have there, Adi?
Well, I mean, you see, like, all of these individuals that you mentioned, Gibran, Pranowo, Prabowo, and Anies, they all have come from one way or another from the Jokowi administration, worked together with Jokowi. So, it's nice to see. It's amazing to see that at least three of them are somewhat on good terms, also to say. Well, one is a in complete opposition to some of the things that Jokowi has done. But one thing I did want to pick up about Anies Baswedan is his entire campaign was very Gen Z centric here. He sort of like combined like the whole K-pop craze that a lot of Indonesians have, and kind of like marketed himself as a politician that knows how to talk to K-pop stans, Gen Z, and that kind of like forced Gibran and Prabowo's hand to embrace a lot of social media campaigns. So yeah, I mean, this is quite in terms of volume. I don't think a lot of other countries in Southeast Asia has seen this kind of mobilization of using social media or TikTok or Facebook or other kind of social media platforms to win over an election. It just goes to show that a lot of young people now, I think now this is where Gen Z in Indonesia are allowed to vote, finally have given the chance to vote. So capitalizing on that, it's kind of like I mean, of course, we've seen sort of in Malaysia during our last elections that kind of tactics being employed, but the level of sophistication that is being on hand, that's being shown on hand here, is quite interesting. Like you see Ganjar Pranowo getting other celebrities like Once Mekel to come to Malaysia to win over the Indonesian diaspora here to come and vote for him. It's leveraging a lot on the whole entertainment industry, which I think you always like to talk about. Is that Indonesia has a very huge, very sophisticated entertainment industry. It's obviously it can be leveraged to win over political support. That is one thing that I have noticed. But at the same time, it's how to say, these okay. Let's be honest here. None of these candidates have shown that kind of character that Jokowi has shown. Jokowi has been able to manage the expectations of the elites. At the same time, he has shown himself to be very down to earth, being very like a people's person, a man of the people, so to speak. Something that a lot of people in Surakarta, which is where Gibran is the mayor of, uh, mentioned that Gibran doesn't have that kind of touch with the people on the ground, and this is, I guess that this is a very important selling point for why people would support Jokowi. And I would see that a lot of these other politicians on running up to the presidency just don't have that kind of stuff. Basically, they don't have that kind of substance that Jokowi has. As in terms of vision, it's not as also on the grander scale in compared to Jokowi. So he kind of has set the bar very, very high in what's come to be expected of an Indonesian leader. But of course, that's easy to say once until the how do you say it comes to pass already. Interestingly, I think that the status quo somewhat will remain. I think even though if whoever wins other side aside from Anies Baswedan, Jokowi would still have a role to play in terms of in this whatever government is being formed, because he's managed to secure Prabowo support, who at the time before then was seen as one of his biggest challenges to overcome, and he also has Pranowo, who somewhat toes the line as well with Jokowi. So he sort of has his hand in in the pieces of the pie here, and I think he would be able to exert some of that, considering how if he's able to maintain some relevance after the elections, he will still have some way to exert his influence to ensure that his vision does remain, which one of it is the movement of the capital city from Jakarta to Kalimantan, Nusantara.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because these three couldn't be more different than now, even though they have some similarities with one another. But let me just highlight what if any of these president should take an oath. So if Ganjar wins, that some people are concerned that the cabinets that gonna be represented after on will not be his choosing, but it will be people behind the curtains, especially the party's president. We all know infamously Megawati. So it will be Megawati's hand-picked cabinet that will just sort of show Ganjar as a puppet for the PDIP party. And for Prabowo, on the other hand, is Prabowo, like I mentioned, has a dark history with people who were born before 1980. So if you're teenagers in Jakarta at the time, you know what happened. So you would have a different view of Prabowo. But if you were born after the late 1980s, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't even heard about his name. So you are safe. You would know him as a chubby grandfather figure that he tried to portray himself today on TikTok. So that's where with his weaknesses will come in, and also uh, uh, Prabowo is never like get hold of being uh, some sort of close to Jakarta, as of Ganjar and Anies. These two serve as governor in Jakarta. So Prabowo doesn't have that, but Prabowo have the international community relations that already sparked. He was the since long time ago, and now he's the defense minister. He has some relationship going on with community. World leaders, so he has get that sorted, and that would not be true for Ganjar and Anies. But for Anies as well, some concern if he wins that Indonesia gonna stand on losing a lot of monetary in terms of monetary gain, because there's gonna be major changes, and these changes, as you mentioned, Adi, is one of them is Nusantara relocation. Anis said that why would we want to spend more on things that not even adjourn in the top five of Indonesia's needs? Why shouldn't we just make the small city become medium and medium city become bigger or big? This is his policy that we want to redirect some fund to the cities along of Java Island. Yes, we may complain about how Jakarta is sinking by the day, but yeah, it's just Jakarta. Why don't we move to? Why don't we decentralize to satellite cities around Jakarta? Jakarta, I mean, around Java Island. We have Surabaya, we have Bandung, we have other cities. You name it, they have it there. And though Jakawi is named as infrastructure of Indonesia's development, but it's also bring negative to Jokowi because they some of this if you if you zoom in like the high speed rail in Jakarta in Jakarta Bandung is actually over budget about 1.5 billion US dollar. So this is not something that you want to be in as running in for the presidential election. The promises that you made, and this is after all a debt to uh, to Xi Jinping, to the Chinese Communist Party. So they have that. What do you have there, Adi?
I mean, of course, Anis wants to see himself as a reformer, the anti-Jokowi, the antithesis to Jokowi, basically. So it's definitely there will be some appeal to some people who know if they find they never really like Jokowi, this is finally their chance to actually have that kind of representation in polls, basically. But in terms of let's say Prabowo, let's go back to Prabowo here, is of course, like you say, is cultivated that image that's quite open and friendly to people born after the 1980s. Like, I don't think a lot of people would still remember that he's the nephew-in-law, I think, was it, to
Yeah,
nephew-in-law to a certain leader,
son-in-law
son-in-law to a
to
certain
uh,
from
Indonesia first president.
yes. So that seems to be lost for a lot of in terms of conversation. Other than people just knowing him as a long-time veteran politician that has always sort of been in Jokowi's shadow, so to speak. But yeah, its implications on not just Indonesia itself, but in terms of Malaysia. Let's go back to back home here to Malaysia. Is a lot of Malaysia, or let's say Sabah and Sarawak, has been investing quite a lot of resources in preparation for this relocation. They believe that there's a great amount of potential to be had with Nusantara. We've even talked about expanding the business community in in Borneo itself, to accommodate this. Certain things like a CIQS complex in, let's say, in Sabah or in Sarawak, or even new ports to be developed to maximize the Straits of Makassar. So there is a lot of, if that is to not materialize or not bear fruit, then there is a lot of resources wasted on our end, and this is a huge investment to take, which has had a lot of political ramifications domestically as well. So why should we focus on tapping into that when we have our own issues? So there's a lot of political currency as well that's being invested into this whole move. Just recently, Kalimantan has developed quite, I think, about 2 or 3 dams already to just be able to supply power for the region, some of which is already being pulled over to Sarawak. So a lot of activity is happening in Borneo right now under Jokowi's leadership. And of course, he made it constitutionally binding, that it's become part of the Indonesian constitution. So for someone like Anis to come out and oppose this in a way doesn't make it seem very confident for people abroad outside of Indonesia. It might appeal to in voters who are concerned bread and butter issues, but for, let's say, on the macro level, it seems like it's quite it would be quite disappointing for a lot of people outside. Of course, if, let's say, in the event that the dark horse does win the election, is, well, you've made your beds, now you have to sleep in it. But if Prabowo should be able to navigate, because he has been committed to upholding that part of Jokowi, and I think Gibran is in a way being set up to continue that even further, to have even further influence to allow Jokowi's legacy to continue. I mean, in a way, Jokowi has amended the constitution to allow his son, who is about 36 years old, to actually run for vice presidency, which is amazing. It's crazy, really, because you force the courts to amend the law to lower the age of requirement for a vice president of a country of several hundreds of millions of people. So Jokowi does definitely have that pull. You cannot run away from his influence at all, and I think Prabowo has sort of accepted that. Ganjar has also sort of accepted that, and Gibran, I guess. Well, let's. I guess people want to see if the fruit didn't fall too far from the tree.
Yeah, definitely. You were talking about how Nusantara is an infrastructure already set up, even including the dam. I think on Malaysia side, we should also be more proactive and reiterate all this infrastructure, CIQ or whatever, so that we can somehow say to whoever the next president of Indonesia is that, hey, we are serious of doing this with whoever, Nusantara or Jakarta, and we will not jeopardize our future because certain allegation of money already being in the pipeline. So then on the Jakarta side also, like, we need to talk about how continuity is important. But if you look at all three candidates, Adi, it's gonna be a hard one to predict, simply because in each representative has their own whatever sort of dipping into each other's party base. So first one, Ganjar belongs to PDIP party. So which is, are you because if you vote Jokowi last time because you are PDIP supporters, now you're gonna be torn apart. Which one you wanna pick? You're gonna be Prabowo and his Jokowi's son, or a Ganjar Pranowo that actually got blessing from the party to run the presidential race. And also we have a Prabowo here that used to gang up or team up with Nadratul Ulama figures or someone very religious figures so that he can soften his image. Now, who plays that role? It's Anies. Anies, and I mean also now, like, always go in the campaign wearing songko and quoting some of in recent cases of because Anies also was very famous in kicking Ahok during 2017, I believe, 2017 at the time, and then Ahok, now we ended up where Ahok ended up and in. So, it's very confusing if you belong to certain party members or you belong to certain ideology, because it's interchange right now. It could be if you're millennial, you think you can relate to Gibran because he's 36 years old. He himself a millennial, but does he act? Does he talk? Does he think as millennial or aspiring millennials throughout Indonesia to be a better Indonesian? Compared to Anies, who consistently talk about policy and sustainability, not just in terms of being Indonesia needs to be green or whatnot, but also in terms of what you talked just now, Adi, rule of law. Because Indonesia, he always mentioned that despite the success, despite this infrastructure project, vanity project, if you may say, that already happened, but if there's no rule of law, if you can just bulldoze your way for a 36-year-old to become a vice president's candidate, it's not a good optics for politicians. But the fact that they do it and they did it and do it anyway shows that how confident they are in Jokowi's image. Jokowi, by the way, as recent as end of last year, had actually approval rating of 70%. No one in the history of Indonesia, outgoing president, has this high level of rating. So just talking about rating, recent polls shows that Prabowo actually around 50% of rating, and then the other two candidates around 20-ish%. Again, this shows that how strong Prabowo with his money here, because he's one of the richest here. If you want to talk about the candidates, all combined actually. So he put his money where his mouth is, and he literally transformed into some sort of granddad figure, more appealing to the whole spectrum of Indonesian, and definitely non that army thingy always come up to debate with only just wearing button down and roll sleeve, looks like Jokowi-ish, if you want to use that comparison anyway. So yeah, that's Indonesia presidential election 2024 in a nutshell. Anything you want to add more, Adi?
I think depending on how it turns out, because it could go any way, to be honest. Let's just be open to that idea. If no majority is to be had, then, well, whatever we said here might not be productive at all. And because Indonesia might have the potential to go for a runoff election in around June or July, to if things don't work out in terms of getting a majority. However, I think it's safe to say that Jokowi is building a very strong legacy. And I think if there was no term limit, he would have easily won a third term, no question. Considering how a lot of his popularity has shown to be transferable to other candidates that has been with him for quite some time, then it would be safe to say that Jokowi has left a huge footprint in terms of Indonesian politics and for Southeast Asia as a whole. So him going out would be sort of like signaling the end of an era, so to say, in terms of leadership in this state in here. We've seen Jokowi as a very towering figure in politics, but also at the same time has shown to be very down to earth. That image of the people, the man of the people, he has successfully portrayed. Is something that not a lot of leaders in Southeast Asia has been able to replicate, and I don't think for quite some time to come I don't think that will be replicated. Someone who is able to hold down the elites, but at the same time appease the larger population. So yeah, it's in that way, it's so sad to say that we are saying goodbye to such a leader of such magnanimity and such character. So that would be how I would see this election. It's a sending off to one of the most vibrant leaders in Southeast Asia.
Very vibrant indeed. Next up, we're going to talk about Iran-Pakistan conflict, and that's coming up next. All right, moving on to the next topic we have at hand here, which is Iran and Pakistan. There's a lot of conflict going on in Middle East, but we're gonna pick on this one. And why, Adi?
Okay, so around late January, there was a whole tit for tat military exchange between Pakistan and Iran, both claiming that certain terrorist elements in Balochistan, were harassing their borders, performing acts of terror on each other. So Iran says, okay, we're going to bomb this terrorist cell in Balochistan in the border. Pakistan retaliates by saying, okay, then we'll do the same to you for extremist elements in Iran. So that would cause a huge outcry in terms of is this another flashpoint between Iran and Pakistan? Because we can see that the whole region has always been quite paranoid with one another, even though they have tried to mend some sort of relationship. So that was a very, particular episode with relations between Iran and Pakistan. And they did say that they would commit themselves more to a low-hanging fruit kind of security arrangement in the future to ensure that terrorism is somehow. But of course, that is just the optics that they portray on the media. Iran has always been known to try assert itself in the region as the regional power by, in a way, because this kind of episode gave Iran the chance to perform a military exercise of some of its new long-range missile equipment, basically. So it's kind of like flexing its own muscles to show that, okay, we can get rid of the terrorists, far away, just across the border. We're able to provide this kind of security to Syria as well, which has been relying on Iran to help fight against ISIS and other terrorist elements in the region. So Iran is taking a lot of measures to reassert itself in the region, considering how it has been hit so many times by international pressure from the West. So it's kind of like saying that don't discount us yet here in the region. We're still, something to be reckoned with. And I think a lot of the officials or a lot of the leaders in Arab countries are going to take note of this particular development. I mean, and this came quite at a very alarming time. Pakistan, at the time it's recording, is actually also having its own elections. It's already entered the polls, and it's an understatement to say that it's a very chaotic situation right now, Pakistan.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you that Iran trying to flex its muscles here, because the timing, it's also one thing, but also if you can see that what's happening with the Houthis, which is also backed by Iran, and up in the north of Israel there, Hezbollah as well. So there's all this conflict going on where Iran can insert itself and then show some sort of like you said, military prowess, if you may say. And again, if we can do it in against Israel, we can do it against the US or the international community in the Red Sea. What is Pakistan with having election, also corruption's all-time high, having convicting their own prime minister who was ousted by the parliament in last year. So a lot of things happening in Pakistan. So I think it's an easy attack from Iran to do such thing.
Yeah, it's I think I just want to put a footnote here in terms of Pakistan's election, because it seems that we talked about Indonesia. Let's give Pakistan the same kind of attention as well, because this does get lost in terms of global news as well. So at the time, like I said, at the time of recording, Pakistan is heading into the polls. They have just arrested its former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who in the popularity polls showcased that he could have potentially won the elections with his party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, the PTI party. But that caused a lot of uproar, basically. Now we see all kinds of bombings across many regions in Pakistan, in Balochistan, in the Punjab region, I believe. As these things get very heated, because you have other alternatives such as the Pakistan People's Party, or even the Pakistan Muslim League, whose candidate Nawaz Sharif might stand a chance to actually win the elections. However, this comes with an underpinning fact that can he be endorsed by the Pakistan military? Because Imran Khan, let's be honest, he got to that position of winning the election because he had support from the military. Once that kind of mutual understanding dried up, they saw it as a chance to remove him. So this has been a recurring theme for Pakistan's leadership, is that you have to play with the military, who is essentially almost, you can say, de facto institution in charge of Pakistan itself. And it's almost, in a way, I won't even say it's a deep state. It's you can easily say the military does control almost every function of Pakistan. They're not under civilian control. They're under its own. They play by its own rules. It's similar to how we look at military juntas in, let's say, Thailand or Myanmar. A similar situation in Pakistan, except that because of a lot of tribal conflict or tribal tensions between regions, this exacerbates the issue even more. So this is, if you think that a lot of elections are chaotic, then Pakistan takes this to another level, and it's seen as almost like a norm here, basically. So it becomes a huge battle between a more moderate global idea of Pakistan and more of a conservative nationalist idea. And I think this is why Iran is also trying to send a message here, is that whoever it becomes the leader of Pakistan, the next prime minister, or even to the military, is that, okay, this is what you're going to be contending with for the next term, basically, is that you're going to remember us as a huge part in your whatever policy making, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday, Adi, there was an explosion of bomb that killed 22 people. This is a day before Pakistan's election, and I think some of the report shows that also that they wasn't expecting the the election gonna follow the schedule because of certain things that gonna happen. But again, this is a completely classic textbook by the military tactic, which is, hey, they're gonna do some bombing, so it's gonna not gonna be so safe tomorrow, which is today. And then you know what? All the postal those boxes, ballot boxes, is gonna be escorted by the military. And I'm not gonna speculate things, but we know how it happens behind closed door. Those military gonna alter or gonna do something towards those votes anyway, allegedly anyway. So this is a shameful act, and that's keep going on in Pakistan, which huge potential that we saw when Imran Khan was first uh, voted in as prime minister. There's a lot of potential coming in, but now it sort of went back to the what it was before, and here again to symbolize that came back to backwardness is Nawaz is here again, potentially going to be the first running, going to be the first one to be the president. And this is sort of like already written in the records, not so much of some sort of a surprise going to happen today. So I think this is where the Pakistan international community must make sure that this nuclear power state should be put into some focus, and the international community needs to play their role to check and balance this. How Pakistan gonna go into the 5 or 10 years from now, because though Imran Khan gonna serve quite a number of years in imprisonment, and then I think a decade of a ban to stand in any political party. So we need to see an emergence from other, especially from Tariq Party, other leaders, except from, well, Imran Khan is not available, unfortunately. So other people, it's upon them so that they can go ahead and give a rise once again as what Imran Khan can do in the years he was elected. So I think this is where the different optics that we need to see as well from international community, because in Pakistan's success is crucial in maintaining Middle East at peace. The stability that we are talking about, even though it's Hamas, in Hamas on the far west, we have Houthi Yemen in the south, and then we have in the east, Pakistan and Iran needs to be on the same page on most things. I'm sure because the differences is quite big when they say, hey, Iran is Shia and Pakistan is Sunni. So the differences, nothing can be done. I disagree to that. We can be different in any school of thought that we subscribe to, but in other things like economic prosperity, these everyone wants that. So why don't we should support whoever can do that? And as long as Pakistan are holding up to the end of the bargain, the international community should do as well. So what else?
I wouldn't give any recommendations on what can be done. I can only give what state what is basically happening here. It is what it is to me, basically. And I think for Pakistan, it's a very difficult situation because of how embedded the military really is. And I think we can go back to that old classical conversation of where did it come from. Of course, we can say that decolonization during the British's time kind of laid some foundations and some kind of responsibility into letting into that. I think that happened because Pakistan became independent, but it was still ruled by British generals until it gave to Ayub Khan, who led it as a military dictatorship. So there was never that peaceful transition towards a more democratic system, not like how India achieved it. So it will always have that kind of that how do you say that, in a way once the foundation is set that way, it becomes very hard to rebuild, so to speak. And I think it would take a radical shift for that to happen. I mean, Imran Khan was considered quite open himself in terms of challenging the military, the same people who gave him that power, the same people who are one of the richest people in Pakistan, who hold control over the seventh strongest military force in the world. They still have a huge part to play in how they shape Pakistan politics, and it's still up to their own personal interests here. Of course, if whatever leader you can have is someone that has to be able to properly balance out these actors, basically. This is very huge comparison, but I mean, Jokowi. Let's go back to Jokowi. He could balance out the elites. He could balance out the people on the ground. I think Pakistan is that, but is going to be someone of an even higher caliber and capability to try to bring these together. Of course, it might sound like the neutral or central way, which means that if you take the centrist approach, nothing gets done. But I think maybe that is an avenue to be taken here. As for Iran here, is of course Iran has always been trying to reassert itself. I mean, when you think of Iran, it's a civilization that has lasted thousands and thousands of years, and at one point they were number one in the world. They were one of the top, most powerful empires. They gave birth to the greatest empires in the world, and now they're in this kind of situation that they're still very proud of their history in a way. No matter what regime changes, that nationalism is still there, is still very proud, very strong, and in seeing that how they become sidelined in a way in terms of world politics because of Western interference, it's no wonder that they always try to reestablish themselves as some force really to be reckoned with here, whether it be through imperial designs back then, or whether it be through using religious narratives to say that, okay, we are countering the decadent West here. It's still, Iran is motivated hugely by motivation to say that we're serious players here. We have always been and we always will be. But something that ambitious would need to be tempered somehow, because once ambitions become too big, you will have detractors who would like to see it fall. Like the Arab states, especially Saudi Arabia, have always been very, very paranoid of Iran's creeping influence into the region, despite being quite separated by distance. But the shadow of Iran can never really be escaped, unless you are, let's say, a power like India, who just through sheer volume of resources and power, they're able to counteract that kind of influence. And of course, Pakistan being a buffer also helps in this regard. But Saudi Arabia doesn't have that kind of powerful buffer to actually stop Iran's influence from penetrating to the region. But this might be a situation where Turkey could also play a role in the Middle East here, a more proactive role in the Middle East. But of course, you want to put Iran, Turkey, and the Arab states into the same, in the same room. It would take a diplomat of a great standing and great capability to actually manage that. So, I mean, this just goes to show that the Middle East is such a very vibrant and very interesting, theater, so to speak. That it's very very interesting to navigate through. But I think this is something that this is going to be the status quo moving forward. All three, the regional powers would maintain its need to assert its dominance in the area. So, I mean, of course, you have countries such as Kuwait, Iraq, who might try to say that, hey, we are also part of this region here, and we also need to be taken seriously. But of course, now in a way, Iraq was once a regional power on the rise, has been completely neutered by Western interference. So it's a very dynamic situation that's happening in the Middle East and South Asia.
Now, it's definitely a long-standing history in the Middle East, and each different region also have each different history. We have in Arabia, in Persia, as you mentioned, in Turkey, Ottoman. So these are all. That's why you say, Adi, it's like putting a lot of egoistic and pessimistic people in same room. You can never get down to that, because all of them, despite their greatness in the in the past, it's we're living in the current moment. We need to call spade a spade, and I think more than ever we need them to cooperate. Otherwise, smaller players like Palestine, Yemen, always going to be some sort of a puppet or proxies to these great powers, the Saudis, the Turks, the Iranians. Despite that, even though certain countries like Bahrain, Kuwait, or small little countries, monarch, that successfully put themselves into the world stage for a certain good reason, but this template, this blueprint needs to be followed by any other countries like Palestine, maybe, or Jordan. Hey, congratulations on Jordan, by the way, reaching for Asia Final Cup for the first time ever. Now that 4-0 defeat to Malaysia wasn't feel so bad after all. We are losing to a finalist, so that's feels so good right now. So yeah, on a more serious note, this is Middle East is a hotbed of conflicts or deep in historical claim. So yeah, looking forward, the young leader emerging from that region, most namely Mohammed bin Salman, even though a lot of criticism against him that he tried to change a Saudi into different more of an Islamic way. But I think this is where the centrist play the role. And if he is what he said he is, it's going to be a wonderful time for the next 5-10 years in Middle East, starting from Saudi and so on. Again, these countries are what we call this monarchy, full monarchies, a country. So they are not used to check and balance through democratic processes. So whatever said in the past may not be the same when he is really the king, or the king of Saudi in the future. Anything we want to add on to
I think
the topic?
when it comes to trying to appreciate the situation here, is that we have to remember this region, part of the world, has grievances and history that goes back thousands and thousands of years, hundreds of years, thousands of years, compared to, let's say, grievances between the West. That's been only happening since America was formed. Only when they became part of the world stage was like the past 100 years. So you're trying, when we have to appreciate the dynamics, is you have to really go back very, very far, and you would find a very vibrant, or very, how do you say, a very colorful tapestry of interwoven stories and situations and events that happened between all of these countries and their predecessors. So it's for me, it's of course, Iran was once the great hegemon. They were once the great power in the area. Then, of course, they had certain situations where the British interfered, and they also had a huge period of unrest with the removal of the Shah, removing thousands of years of a monarchy in Iran, so to say. So it's in a way now redefining itself, and going back to that whole nationalist pride, going back to their history, their past. I guess that is, like I said, it's a very strong motivator for Iranian leadership. They can say that it could be in opposition to anything, but it comes down to the same. It was once a proud power, and it stands to become one again. But however, times have changed, and I think stability is the greatest virtue in terms of navigating geopolitical situations. If Iran claim it to be that great power that it says it is, playing the role of a mediator is always going to bring you a lot of benefits in terms of the eyes of the international community. Egypt has tried to play that role in terms of mitigating Israel and Palestine. I think the Saudis are trying to mull the idea all over again. However, I've always questioned their interest in this conflict, but they're trying to show themselves as a responsible player. Iran Can they play that role? I'm not too sure. Can the regime show that it can play nice with its neighbors, with the small countries, the small players? That still remains to be seen, considering how they are just brazenly showing their might to a neighbor who is going through a great deal of unrest at the current moment. So the whole peace project that a lot of world leaders try to bring up world peace is still a long way to go, and sometimes the cracks in the system don't really get highlighted fully or fully appreciated. So we hope to see maybe a smooth transition of power when it comes to Pakistan, hopefully, because it's a tragedy of what's happening right now, a huge conflict happening in the country over political disputes, over political unrest. So, of course, we hope to see more stability in that region.
Yeah, I think just like many other changes in the world, it starts from within. And as long as the Islamic regime is still in power, I think there won't be any changes on the foreign policy for Iran. So it's sort of gonna be like very defensive all the time because of the intimidation from Western powers. So I think if we want to see more friendly Iran, more open Iran, like you said, like want to be a mediator to certain conflicts, I think the change of regime needs to be done first. And it was a good news that we had when we talked about a few months ago about the killing of a young girl because of just because of the hijab, wearing hijab in the public. So I think how strict the government is towards the Iranian people and how they perceive themselves in the world stage needs to be softened a little bit. And I think the Iranian people know better, uh, maybe for the next or for future, because it's gonna hold them into it. So what's gonna happen today will make or break Iran in the next 5 or 10 years. As a lot of Middle East country now progressing with leaps and bounds, even the smallest country like Qatar or Kuwait, that already Bahrain, that already showing some kind of improvement in terms of want to be open and more friendly towards world world community. Uh, uh, and Iran, I think, with all the history that you mentioned, all the greatness, thousands of years of Shah dynasty, it's easily for them to be one of the biggest pillars in world politics or world powers. But yeah, it's not gonna be in the hand of Islamic regime.
Yeah,
Needs to be more something else. All right,
yeah,
I
but
think
there's one
yeah.
more thing.
Go
But I
ahead.
do hope that. I mean, it's safe to say that there is a huge progressive an element that wants progress in Iran. There's even a lot of elements that would like to see the return of the Shah. So, could the Islamic regime be unhinged from the seats of power uh, in a peaceful way? Possibly, considering how there's protests in Tehran quite often now, trying to fight for more democratic freedoms, more progressive values. Of course, the regime would say this is a Western influence, but hey, I think there's a universal baseline of in terms of you know that freedom and universal values in a way, I'd say. And I think as something caters very it's like like a rubber band effect. Is that as they pull it towards a further extreme, it's going to rebound. Eventually, it's going to be launched back with that equal kind of force. And I think it's going to be a very moderate and central force. I think, from what I've seen in Iran itself, Iranians, they put their national identity, their cultural identity, very very seriously. Sometimes it even overrides the religious identity. So it will be interesting to see the Iran that comes in 10 to 20 years, their role in the international community. So I'll just leave it back to you, Avis.
All right, that's I think that's it for the time and for this recording for today. And if you are new to Content Council, please follow us on Facebook. And we might be going to be very active in TikTok and in Instagram soon. But for now, if you want to reach us, feel free to find Kopitiam Council on Facebook. And of course, you can listen us in all major platforms, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. It's been a fun weekend at KL Podcast, and we're just gonna announce that we will be having more consistent episode from now on. So if you're listening again, if you're listening for the first time, be excited because more coming from us. Anything from you, Eddie?
I just want to say in advance, Happy Chinese New Year to everyone celebrating the holidays. Please do take care of yourself as you travel back home to celebrate, and stay tuned because we hope to bring you with more consistent content. Thank you so much.
All right. With that, goodbye for now. See you in the next episode.